A very good morning to all. On behalf of KRVIA, I would like to extend a warm welcome to Anuradha Parmar and thank her for taking the time to be here today. Why design, including communities to find lasting solutions? Anuradha Parmar, Executive Director UDRI, is an architect and urban planner and has worked for over 15 years on urban development projects in the US, UK and India. Her interest lies in urban regeneration, conservation and regional and environmental planning. She has worked with local governments, public and private institutions and the London Olympics Growth Boroughs to implement planning projects. Her work has included the implementation of urban regeneration schemes, stakeholder engagement, capacity building and fundraising. Prior to the US, she practiced as an architect in India. She has a Masters in Community and Regional Planning from UT Austin and a BR from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. With that, I will now hand over the mic to Anuradha.
Hello everyone. It's really nice to be here today, and I see that there are certain patterns that are universal. Even in our college, the seats furthest away from the speaker got filled first, and the ones closer were usually empty. So today I have a very different presentation for you. It's more like a story, and I'll be taking you through my journey and my experiences, and how this question of why design has constantly steered me towards my sort of journey and led me to what my focus is at UDRI today. So let me start from the very beginning. I grew up in Shimla, in Himachal, and I used to pass by these beautiful buildings, this neo-Gothic Christ Church building and this State Library building every day on my way to school, and I somehow never stopped to wonder why these buildings were there. I never wondered about the use of these buildings, how beautiful they looked. I just took all of it for granted. Until one day, I was literally jolted out of my sleep. There was a landslide. And I was yanked out, and my mom was saying, just run out, the building's going to fall. And I must have been about 12 years old at that time. I came out and I saw my neighbor's house literally collapse in front of my eyes. And our house was sort of hanging in there. And I think we were all in shock. And I think that was the beginning of my why design questions, where I started to wonder why the neighbor's house fell and why mine sort of stood over there. What was the meaning of a retaining wall? What made these buildings on the ridge timeless? What made them beautiful? What was the purpose of those black lines on the State Library building? Was it just aesthetic, or was it serving another purpose? So that was the time when I started wondering about design. But also, another thing that happened was I realized that design has a responsibility. It has a responsibility towards people, because that day lives were lost. So in any case, my curiosity 5 years later, my curiosity led me to SPA. I did architecture for 5 years, and I started working in an architecture firm in Delhi. We did interiors projects, and we did like these small house projects. Work was interesting, but not exciting for me. I was missing the engagement with people bit. There was another jolt, and this time it was mother of all earthquakes, 26 January 2001, when the Bhuj earthquake happened. And there was destruction everywhere. People had lost lives. There were cities that were leveled to the ground overnight. And I was getting restless in my architecture office. I really wanted to get involved. Everyone around me was finding ways to volunteer, and Delhi became this nodal point for managing relief work for Bhuj. So I met these seniors of mine from the planning, SPA planning program, who had set up this organization called SEEDS, and they did disaster mitigation planning. And I happened to talk to them, and they said that, during this earthquake, we're getting so much money is coming into India, so much relief work is happening, food is coming in, clothing is coming in, so much stuff is coming in, it's almost a problem to manage it. We don't have the frameworks, we don't have the systems in place to manage it in a systematic way. But you know what is lacking is donation of knowledge. There is no donation of technical expertise to build in these disaster zones. And that statement stuck. I was like, I need to get involved with this. I want to get involved with this. I quit my job, I joined Seeds. And we were a group of people, we started doing research, we started reaching out to people in other parts of the world, trying to collect all the information about how to build in a disaster zone, in an earthquake zone. Even, techniques coming out of Himachal where you build those dhaji walls which had that framework and double walls with rubble in it, all those things started being put together. And we put together our research document, and we went to site. We went to this village near Bhuj called Patanka, where we started working with the communities there. So when we started engaging with the communities, what happened was they had received a lot of money from the government, they had received grants to build their houses, but none of them were convinced about spending that money to build houses. What they wanted to do was save that money for their daughter's wedding or some other function, and they were going back to the old construction techniques. So it took us almost like 2 weeks of working with the community, more than that, trying to convince them. We had these models, we showed them different things, but what worked very well was showing them these shake table tests, which were life-size buildings which were constructed. The one on the left is with the techniques that existed in the village at that time, and the one on the right has these reinforcements and frames where there are openings. There was a reinforced sort of concrete band that was running at various levels all around, and other smaller techniques of tying up the walls, and also something called stonecrete, where you put stone in concrete instead of the regular concrete to build. And all of it sort of, when you put it on a shake table test, what you see in the inset is that the building on the left collapsed and the one on the right stayed. And a simple thing like that sort of converted people, and there was a huge multiplier effect. There were local masons that were trained to build right. People were involved in designing their own houses. They were involved in where the house will go. So everyone came together to put this together. We started with 10 houses. 250 houses were built ultimately. And the skill of training these masons had a huge capacity. It was a capacity building exercise, and it was very lasting, because this group of people then went to other villages to convince people there and to build right. And they stayed in touch with Seeds for times when there were other disasters. They were willing to go to an Afghanistan area or a Himachal area to work with the community there to tell them what it meant to build right. So it was a huge success, and riding on that high of this project, I decided to apply to the US to do my master's in. I ended up doing my master's in community and regional planning. I wanted to do disaster mitigation planning, but I realized there's no formal course for disaster mitigation planning, and so I ended up applying to this university, where I worked with the professor who had an interest in disaster mitigation planning. And the funny thing is that even today, 80% of our money goes into relief and recovery work. We don't have solid mechanisms for mitigation or incorporating it in the planning field, so that early on those sort of measures are taken into account. So I went to DC, I went to UT Austin, I finished my master's, and then I started working in Washington DC. The next two examples that I'll take you through are also examples of working with the community. And when we say community, it doesn't necessarily mean a rural community or the underprivileged. It's anyone and everyone, So the next example that I'll take you through is in Washington DC. This is in KD's. This was called KD's album. So if you're familiar with DC, it's like a diamond, and on the west side is where Georgetown is, and that's this historic part of DC, and it has high-end retail. This is a retail corridor with very fancy stores, fancy shopping and restaurants and furniture stores. So our client was this person in this orange building. He came to us looking to convert it into a furniture store, and behind this he had a warehouse where he was storing the furniture. So if I show it to you in plan, so over here is the high street which I showed a picture of to you, and so over here is that high street, and this is where these were the mixed land use sort of blocks where there was retail at the bottom and there was office buildings on top, and behind this was an alley, and this was a mixed-use residential, primarily residential block, and there was a canal over here. So when this guy was talking to us, he was like, I have this furniture store and I have this warehouse at the back, but it's a pity that this alley is not being used and there is so much potential over here. He was a European. So he's like, in Europe we managed to do so much with all our space and here we are wasting this space. So one conversation led to another. My boss at that time was an Austrian architect. His name was Leopold Bokel. And he said, okay, if you're willing to sacrifice your shop, I have a solution for you. So that is where the idea started. It ended up involving multiple other developers, multiple other retail owners, multiple sort of resident groups in the area, and the government. And the solution that came out was fantastic. He ended up giving up his shop frontage to get access to the alley at the back. So if you see, there is no shop here, it is just a corridor leading to the back. And it opened up the space beautifully. There were spillover spaces, and the warehouse where he was going to store his furniture ended up becoming a beautiful cafe. In fact, they named it Cafe Leopold after the architect who had that idea. It was a fantastic experience of revitalizing small dead frontages, areas where they were ailing art galleries actually, and like dead alleys became vibrant. This did not happen overnight. It took its time, but slowly businesses started coming to this area, And if you see this, this is an exact sort of image of how there were dead frontages. You worked with the government, you got things rezoned, and things opened up. It became beautiful. It just revived the area. So it was one person having the vision or the willingness to give up something small for the larger public good, and I think he benefited in the end. The next example is very different. It is where one problem brought everyone together. So if you see this, this is the Langley Air Force Base. It's in Virginia, it's south of Washington, DC. And this was a military base, and the community next to it, which was the city of Hampton, they used to get a lot of complaints from the residents. They were fed up with the noise from the jets, the fighter jets, and they used to keep saying that, we are worried that we might be in the APZ, which is the accident-prone zone of this Air Force base. The opportunity came in 2005 when there was something called BRAC, which is this base realignment and closure. So what the US does is that every 5 years they revisit their DoD vision. Their Department of Defense revisits their vision, and based on what their mission is, they end up reorganizing their urban bases. In some cases they end up sort of combining their bases, in some cases they close them down. So in 2005, as part of BRAC, what they decided was that this Langley Air Force Base will combine its mission with the neighboring military base. So that was an opportunity. A new master plan was going to be done, and there was an increase in mission. We were consulting for the DoD at that time, and we had also worked with the government, and just happened to be in these meetings where they said that this area has a common problem. The Department of Defense was this base was struggling with flooding issues. Their runways used to get flooded. And the community was also facing flooding issues, and something had to be done. So the city was very proactive. They said, let's come up with a adaptive resilience plan, land use based adaptive resilience plan together. And that was it. People came together. The initial meetings, they organized the meetings, initial meetings where the community was there, also DOD was there, were a nightmare to attend. You know, people were angry, they were shouting at everyone. They used to be like, you know, there's too much noise, we are worried about our houses, we are worried about the safety. And there was a funny incident. In one of these meetings, there was this guy who got up and he was very angry and he was saying, I can't sleep at night, there was too much noise, blah, 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 blah. And in the end, he said, and you know what, there are these randomly our car garages keep opening. I hope that's nothing to do with you guys. He just said that. And the two people from Langley Air Base were looking at each other. There was pin drop silence. And they were like, oh my God, we have to change the bandwidth of our frequencies because it's interfering with the garage doors which were just opening up. So it was just a simple icebreaker over there. They changed their bandwidth of the frequencies that they were using to communicate. But one meeting led to the other, and in the end, together, they put together their adaptive use, their sort of resilience plan. Not only was it just put together, roles and responsibilities were decided. The DOD released maps like these where you can see the sound contours where they are coming. And this rectangle in the middle is the APZ, the accident prone zone. And the city actively acquired the land which was falling in the APZs, converting them into compatible uses. But the residents had a say in what kind of uses could come there, whether it was urban agriculture, whether it was a golf course, whether it was warehouses, whatever it was. So together, once they started finding solutions together, it became a very exciting process. Also, where large level interventions were required, where the city and the DOD had to come together, responsibilities were taken up, funding came from the Department of Defense as well, funding came from the government as well, and wherever there were smaller individual level interventions that were required, incentive schemes were identified, clearly put up on the sort of websites for people to use. And I mean, I wasn't there till the end, but the plan had areas where living shorelines would come in, oyster reefs would come in. These are large-scale interventions with the DOD and the city took up together. And individual level interventions, whether managing stormwater on the site or rain gardens or stormwater parks and paved parking type things, those were incentivized at an individual level. So overall, I would say what happened, what started off as hatred sort of became pride. A lot of people started working together. Then, in 2008, I moved to London. Exciting time to be in London. London Olympics were going to happen in 2012, and it was a planner's dream come true, you know, to be part of the city at that time. Multiple things were happening. All the stars were aligning, and a lot of work was going to happen. Just to give a little bit of context, this is a map of London, and if you see this bend in the river, in the Thames, east of this bend is where the Olympics, all the Olympics projects were happening. The western side of London was already very well developed, thriving in tourism. So a city like London doesn't really need the Olympics. They were going to use the economic impetus coming from the Olympics to revive the eastern side. And if you see this image here, again where the bend in the river happens, this is where Canary Wharf is. It's the financial district, and this is a little bit like BKC. It was getting done in the early 1990s and the late 1980s. And at the turn of the century, they had also put this Millennium Dome here, which is a big venue for exhibitions and concerts. And they had the DLR, which is the overhead metro rail. All that infrastructure was being planned. It was already underway. Olympics finally came in this area. You can see the Olympic Stadium here, and the Legacy Park was in this. Two regenerate the neighborhoods. You know, the large infrastructure was in place, but the neighborhoods were going to be revived using the Olympics. So I started working on this scheme in Bethnal Green. It was an urban regeneration scheme, and Bethnal Green is in the Brick Lane area, somewhere in this area. Buildings in Brick Lane looked like this. In Bethnal Green looked like this. They were boarded up. There was general decline. There was overcrowding on the pavements. Very poor housing conditions. A lot of overcrowding in the housing areas. Decline in retail, urban blight, and a general sense of unsafety. You know, areas looked unsafe. The mandate was to help revive these areas, not just physically, but also introduce programs that would make sure that people have the skills to benefit from all the economic benefits that were coming to this area. A lot of departments came together: conservation, transportation, housing, zoning and land use, because areas were rezoned, and also parks and schools, because parks and schools are these magnets that attract people to an area. The framework that went across all the interventions was that you had to make sure that the area was developed economically after the project happened. You had to make sure that the community got skills which were long-lasting and could benefit from the changes that were going to come to the area. You had to make sure that your solutions were sustainable, and when I mean sustainable, I mean long-lasting. And then we had to build upon a sense of place, a sense of pride. What made that area unique? What was it about that area that people liked? We had to enhance that. The appraisal exercises that came were not just physical in nature. It wasn't just mapping the nodes or the conflict areas or the dilapidated buildings or the land use. It wasn't just that. It was also experience mapping, and in the center of it all was a sense of place. There were multiple meetings held in different areas where people talked about what they were proud of, what they would like to conserve in the area. What is it that gave them that sense of place? And as a result, the programs and the projects that came out were not just physical in nature. When a physical program was being implemented, in parallel came a scheme which told people about merchandising skills. If they got a new shop front, they were told how to merchandise how to display the goods in their shops. They were told how to upscale their businesses, how to make a website that would advertise their goods, how to change their businesses to cater to the new crowd that was coming to the area, or even how to bookkeep and apply for loans, and what are the loans that are available to change. So all these schemes came in parallel to all the physical improvements that were happening. And I'll give you some examples. This was the Bethnal Green Terrace, and this was the building that was there. And this is what the area looks like now. And if you see in that inset, historically this area was very vibrant. It was flourishing. There were markets here, there were pubs here, and this Bethnal Green, 123 Bethnal Green, became the nodal focal point for a message of revival, for a message of pride in the area. New sort of pavements came in, shop fronts came in, signage strategies came in, and these people got those skills to work with the new facades or the new look of the area. This was in the center of the terrace where there was a leather showroom, and it was owned by a Sardarji. But when you historically look at this building, there used to be a pub, and he was very happy with the prospect of being able to convert it back into a pub. And I'll show you pictures of what it looks like now. This is Well and Bucket, which was converted back to a pub. Same owners were given the skills to work with the changes that were going to come to the area. The pavement in front of this area was widened, a cycle scheme came in. So all these small things were brought in. And this is a picture from the website of the pub itself, and you see how vibrant this area is on the weekends. This was another part of the terrace where there were closed businesses. On the right, if you see, there was, I think, a fried chicken or some shop like that. And again, other users came in. If people had the skills to run a restaurant, people were given ideas about how they could change their businesses to cater to a different clientele that was going to come to the area. Again, where there were spillover spaces, pavements were widened and parking was created. So this did not happen again in a span of 2 to 3 years. In fact, some of these changes came after the Olympics. But the fact that those little catalytic interventions were in place and the people were given the skills, these things happened. So this is again a picture of in front of one of the coffee shops. And these are images from the websites, different websites now who are advertising this area to be a great place for first-time home buyers, interesting businesses to come in. And this is, London is all about its open markets. This is one of the most vibrant areas for its marketplaces and pubs. And again, from one of the websites where they're saying that full of life and great people, Bethnal Green can confidently lay claim to being the heart of London. So, you know, the greatest win was that, if not all, a majority of the businesses ended up staying. They ended up surviving that change. And they're still there. So, moving on to UDRI, but before I move on to UDRI, I just want to take a little break here, a pause here, and reflect on some of the things we've already covered. So, before I moved to Mumbai, I had lived, worked, and studied in about 5 to 6 different cities. And I feel lucky to have had that opportunity. But when you move, you win some and you also lose some. The good news is that you win more than you lose. And when you move, you realize that you've gathered this basket of transferable skills. And those are the things that sort of make you realize that it's something like a diplomatic passport. You can go live and work anywhere you want. For me, the realization that whether it is communities dealing with the aftermath of an earthquake in India, or if it is communities, shop owners dealing with issues of gentrification and fearing that their businesses are going to get taken away, they'll have to sort of sell those and move elsewhere, or it is communities dealing with noise from a military base. The transferable learning is that if you equip and empower communities with the right tools to engage, you come up with solutions that are beautiful, solutions that are embedded and owned by the community, and then they are long-lasting. I joined UDRI 3 years back in the middle of COVID, and what sort of fascinated me about the legacy of UDRI was this thing that they have tried to demystify this complex thing which is urban. They've tried to break it into palatable nuggets from time to time, and they've put it out in the public domain to make this whole process accessible and inclusive. They've democratized urban planning and urban decision making to some extent. And that is what fascinated me. And now, just to sort of explain what I think UDRI does is that it operates at a space where policy makes a switch to implementation. It's that scale where people start getting involved. You have to monitor programs. You have to analyze impact. It's that level where that switch happens. And if I could use this diagram to explain it, there are a lot of organizations and institutes that make policy. Those are the organizations at the top. They make policy, it is complex, it's difficult to engage with. And then there are these last mile small organizations that do grassroots level implementation work. And I feel UDRI works somewhere in the middle where they try to simplify policy, bring it down to the grassroots level organizations so that those frameworks are simplified to engage in. And they take all these smaller level interventions, link them back to them. So the heritage, the conservation legislation of 1995. So in 1995, there were numerous smaller but very meaningful efforts that were happening in Mumbai in the conservation space. People were trying to document buildings, people were trying to there was activism against buildings, heritage buildings that were being torn down. But UDRI was able to bring all these individual efforts together by pushing for a legislative change, so linking back to policy, introducing the concept of a Kala Ghoda festival that would build sort of pride in the area, and pushing for that 1995 legislation. It was the first of its kind in the country, and it has had a lasting impact. Also, another thing that UDRI did at that time was that there were all these individual organizations doing their bit for the improvement of the fort area. They brought all of them together under one umbrella called FORT, which is Federation of Residents Trust, and everyone started working together. And in 2000, there was a fort area master planning exercise taken up by all these individual people coming together under that umbrella. And that became the basis for analysis, the basis for deciding where projects would come. One of the projects that came out of that was the Fort Ferry, which connected CST to Churchgate, because there wasn't enough connection between the two. There were other projects that came up. In fact, we worked with others to push for the UNESCO nomination for the World Heritage status of Victorian and Art Deco ensemble of Mumbai. And this was done to highlight the heritage in the area. We have that status now. We put up a 3D model at CSMVS. It was very well received. Kids love it. They have questions about heritage. There was a DCR for heritage precincts that was prepared. Signages are being put up everywhere to highlight the heritage. So these are efforts that happened because a larger level analysis was done. One of the projects that we are working on currently is to look at the fort area again, because there are numerous large projects coming to the area. There is impact on the area. As you can see on the east, there are multiple projects, including the Trans-Harbour Link. There is going to be an international cruise terminus. The Gateway of India revamp is happening. On the west side, of course, there's the coastal road and the metro line that is coming in. 5 new metro stops coming into the fort area. And more than 200 people per minute are expected to come in and out of these locations. And that is going to increase by 25%, projected to increase by 25% in the next 5 years. So all these things are happening, and the government is doing small beautification projects, and that is not the answer. So there is a reason for a larger vision. There is a need for a comprehensive vision, so that, all the background material needs to be prepared, analyzed, so that it becomes a tool for people to engage with, whether it is stakeholders from the community side or from the government side. It is a tool that even they need to manage operationalizing their various beautification projects. So this is one of the things that we are working on right now. The other project that we are working on is a open space management project. So all these are pictures of open space. And you can see, I don't have to talk about this. There is encroachment of various kinds. People don't really even know what their rights are when it comes to open spaces. And it is a common good. It is something that cannot be managed or maintained by a one-time exercise. It is something that requires, again, everyone to have an eye on, keep an eye on, and then make sure that it is done in a continuous basis. So with that in mind, we are mapping open spaces in 2 pilot wards, using that to create a strategy document which would sort of outline how open spaces can be protected, enhanced, managed, etc. The entire mapping exercise is leading to the preparation of a capacity building deck, where the performer or the mapping and all of it can be just used by someone else, an institute or an ALM, to map open spaces in their own neighborhoods. And then a GIS layer which we are hoping would have a public interface. So this is the capacity building deck. Open source software is being used to map these things. And the GIS layer will look something like this, with detailed metadata, and people would come to know where there is an encroachment, or how much paved surfaces exist, and also most importantly, whether there is a DP road access to the open space. So all those things are important for people to realize, to then demand, and to keep an eye on. The last project I'll talk about it's of a different scale. This is demystifying the spatial planning process and capturing learnings from that. So the 74th Amendment sort of gives us the various levels at which governance happens in cities, in the urban side. And what we are trying to do is, so there is a lot of discussion around spatial planning at the national level. There are a lot of programs that are coming out of the center, but they are failing to build capacity at the local level. And with that in mind, we are trying to understand what is it that cities in different states, what is it that they're dealing with, and what are those grassroots level learnings as they navigate this whole system of spatial planning, which is dictated by their town planning acts, by the national schemes that are coming in like Amrut and Smart City. So we have all these analysis frameworks. I won't go into these, but just briefly, if you compare, like if you see this brown boundary, it sort of snugs the ULB in Mumbai, which means that the ULB is the boundary of the development plan. And if you see in other cities, the brown boundary is away. So the ULB, the municipal corporation area is the small purple one, and the boundary that they deal with is different. So right there is a difference, and similar analysis is being done, and our learnings are being captured. So I'm just coming to the end of my presentation. I just want to quickly say that all these projects, all these programs that are happening, the idea is to put it back in the public domain in various formats for everyone to engage with. We have a resource library, we have the maps database, Mumbai Reader, and we have handbooks and films, and all of it is done so that the small efforts in some way are put out in the public domain for everyone to engage with. We want to create more discussion forums so that a spotlight can be put on issues that are not very obvious, and that happens through workshops, seminars, conferences, exhibitions, through discussion forums. And finally, we have acted as knowledge partners. Wherever we've had to dive deep, we've partnered with implementing organizations to carry our research forward. And recently we partnered with Harvard University to do an urban conservation sort of studio for the fort area. So now, just coming back to my last few slides, and coming back to the question of why design. As I said earlier, it is something that has guided me throughout my life. And I think it is a fundamental question that we all need to answer. And if we look at the stages of design, in college, we usually focus on this idea stage, and then we are running last minute to finish delivery. And it flips in the working life, where the client pressure is such that you're focused on the delivery stage and you're spending little time on the idea stage. But really, there are these 5 standard design thinking steps which not just architects but everyone follows. And somewhere we need to start focusing on the empathize, define part of it, and the last part, which is the testing of it, to see if our solutions are really long lasting or not. And if we all start shouldering a common answer to this why design question, whether you decide to be an interiors designer or an architect or a city planner or an urban designer or a policy designer, if we start shouldering this common responsibility of being answerable to our immediate environment and the community around us, it will be something that we all carry into our professions. And as the scale becomes higher, I just want to say that, local problems have local solutions, and together those local solutions tackle a larger problem. So with that, I just want to end this and open it up for questions. I hope
supposed to be responsible for that, the TESILs or even the ward officers themselves. So does the UDRI sort of see itself working alongside them, or is it entirely parallel to them in some sense?
So we don't really get into implementation, but we would try to analyze why those units are not empowered enough to carry out the work in the way that they are supposed to. And the idea would be to put again a spotlight on the issues of why it is not happening or what needs to happen. So then push for and nudge for legislative change to incorporate that. So we wouldn't start working with the councillors or the corporators in parallel, but we would say that, this needs to be done. So like in the case of Fort, we have been going back to the government and saying that, you need to start looking at a comprehensive vision for the area. Through the supplementary planning guideline for open spaces, we will go back to the government and say that you need a guideline document that gives you the, so that, at a corporator level, the community can say, these are the issues that I'm facing with open space. Let's do something about it. So a closing the loop sort of system on a public interface. So yes, we would highlight the issues. To get it done would be that, who can run with it? Just run with it. These are the projects that need to be done. Yeah.
Thank you. And actually there was one more question I had. So when we look at the sort of the UDRI itself, where do the projects sort of come from? Are some of them self-initiated, self-funded, or is there a client or a collaborator coming in? How does that sort of work for the UDRI?
There isn't really a client or a collaborator that comes. There are two things that sort of happen. One is where a project is specifically attached to a funder, right? So either that can be initiated from the funder side or from the UDRI side. And sometimes those projects are designed when you're working on other issues and some other issue gets highlighted. So for example, when I think UDRI was engaged with the development planning process, one of the issues that came up was of informal settlements and the Kolivaras, and a project sort of emerged from there of, I think, making sure that land rights, they were linking land rights back to the fact that the parcels were not delineated in the land records. So a project emerged from there. Or when the DP was happening, one realized that, digitally information is not available. Information is not available in one platform, maps are not available. So I think digital inclusion projects came out of that. But where I had shown the slide of workshops and engagements, the idea over there is again to put a spotlight on issues that are not very obvious, that are embedded. And that is where projects also emerge. And it is not just for UDRI, it is for everyone to take on that, these are the issues that need to be worked upon. So that is again a methodology for generating projects and ideas.
Any more questions from anybody?
So thank you so much for the interesting presentation. My question kind of, I don't know, somehow I'm stuck to the idea of donation of knowledge. So, I mean, there is so many things that, UDRI is doing, but the outreach that kind of it deserves in the public domain, say with institution, I think this is one way of, putting it out to people, the kind of work UDRI is doing. But how do you see, in the coming months or years, like what is the kind of mandate which you feel that UDRI can kind of expand upon, or is there priority, so to say? Is it priority with infrastructure? Is it priority with community? Is it priority with the built environment? I mean, something we were discussing before this. I mean, what do you see as a priority for UDRI at this stage, other than all the chaos that kind of goes on one end? What is it an ideal, so to say, structure that you feel that is required at the outset of receiving something more interesting, or that makes also audience engaged in this on a one-on-one level?
Yeah.
So So something maybe if you can tell something about that. Thank you.
So thanks for that question, and I mean it goes back to all the discussions we were having, right? It cannot happen alone. UDRI cannot do this alone. It has to act as a platform to bring other people together, and we all need to take that responsibility of setting up that agenda for the city, where we break up into smaller chunks who's creating what information. There is no duplication, there is no working in silos, and you take care of your own city together, right? And in terms of a vertical that we want to focus on, I think the theme for us is breaking down urban into various themes, putting that information out. But because I said the scale is more of a neighborhood scale, I think the focus is on urban form, and everything links back to urban form, right? Open spaces link back to urban form. It is imagining the city and its policies and how sort of the form of the city is going to shape up, and then to link back all the problems to that and solutions to that. So I think that is going to be the focus of UDRI, which is Urban Design Research Institute. So we want to be sort of coming back to that.
Sorry, just to extend, where do you see heritage kind of going into this, domain of the urban form?
Yeah.
The role of that heritage within that.
So, I mean, you look at the statement, right? The city wants to push Fort area towards a tourism economy. And you look at that statement and you break it down. Heritage has a very important role to play. It has to be highlighted. It has to become part of a lifestyle. Art deco in its just sort of plain sense is not going to be something that is going to attract people, right? It's not going to be something that you'll go and see an art deco building. It has to become a lifestyle. It has to be weaved in with programs where you're going there to experience art deco. So heritage in its physical form is important, but the programs need to come from those collaborations where festivals, art shows, highlight cafes, I don't know, like merchandising shops which start selling art deco. So it has to work at various levels. It won't happen alone, and conservation is important, not just in the physical sense, but in the programmatic sense as well. And actually that was one of the things that was also debated upon in the Harvard collaboration, where it was all about urban conservation, right? So it's not about old buildings anymore. It is also about urban conservation and what it means. So yes, that is something that we would like to discuss and debate more on, come up with frameworks for that and programs for that, for sure.
Anuradha, there's a question here.
How do you fund this project?
How do we fund the projects? Is that the question? So there are different ways. So if it is a project, so we get like Ford Foundation funding or the Tata Trust funding. Those are specific programs, where there is an output attached to it. But we also have other donors who donate to a corpus. Am I answering the question right? Was that the question?
The question was, how does UDRI work as an organization in terms of its funding and finances? Like, the way it was asked was, how do you get your salary?
Or like that?
How do you make money?
There is a salary. So first of all, there is a salary. That's the good news. So it is a non-profit. So I think I see UDRI more as an incubation space for ideas, where there is support to take your research further, and depending on which sort of way you go, either there is funding coming from foundations and specific organizations, or there is a corpus that helps, corpus that is funded by individuals who sort of support the general platform and the research. So we mainly have sort of HNI and foundation support to. We don't sort of do projects for the government and take government money. That is a little bit of a conflict of interest, so we don't.
Thanks, Anuradha. I'll just hand it over.
Thank you so much.